Welcome, everyone. My name is Dustin Boeger, and you have arrived at Drupal and USWDS. It's time to get things started. This is an opportunity for us to kind of show the integration between how we see the integration, at least, of USWDS and Drupal. So why don't we get things started? All right, looking at our presentation today, we're going to have introductions of the sort, then looking at actually getting started. Then we'll look at colors, fonts, and other settings that you can apply. Then digging into custom styling and components. Finally, doing a Drupal UI walkthrough, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers. And hopefully we'll have opened the door just enough that people can have some good questions for us. Let's look at introductions, the cast and the crew. Before we step into that, actually, there's a little bit of disclaimer here. There will be Muppets. Hopefully that doesn't bother anyone, but they're here. We're not the experts. We are learning like everyone else here. We're getting closer to that, but there's always opportunity for everybody to learn. So if you know something that we're not covering and you want to bring it up in the questions and answer, please, we'd love to hear it. There will be some code shown at some point in this presentation. So at that point, feel free to join Statler and Waldorf and take a nap and see if you can check the inside of your eyelids if you need to at that point. We also will share with you that the USWDS site is a great resource. They've done a lot of really good work and put a lot of time in that site. So please take a look at it if you haven't seen it already. And then, of course, every web project, web app, website, however you want to describe it, is its own special snowflake of sorts, and your mileage may vary when using this system. All right, one thing we would like to do is we would like to get a little bit of an idea of what the audience looks like. Everyone that's in here, please, if you could take a second in the chat and give some brief comment on your experience with USWDS. Or no experience, used version 1 but haven't moved to version 2, using version 2, just to give us an idea. And then also let us know a little bit about what your job is. Are you a content creator? Are you working in behind the scenes with the USWDS as a developer, or are you kind of at a top level looking at what the USWDS can do from the manager's perspective? All right, a little bit about me. My name's Dustin Boeger again. I'm a front-end Drupal developer. I consider myself a Swiss Army knife, a jack of trades, if you will. Lots of different things. Having gone from small agencies, working with California state government, and now working with Civic Actions as a Drupal engineer. Most recently, working with the USWDS integration plans for the Department of Defense. Skills, I've got Drupal.org says I have 10 years of experience with Drupal. Doesn't feel like that, but I guess they're not going to lie to me. Do lots with graphic web design, content creation, UI, UX, blah, 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 blah. Enough about me. Brian, and I co-presenter. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Brian.seek. I'm also an engineer here at Civic Actions. I'm currently, this slide is a little out of date. I was currently using USWDS for the Department of Education. We've completed that project. And previous to that, did some work along with Dustin for DOJ on implementing USWDS. Even my Drupal list for 8 years is probably closer to 9 at this point. Dustin asked me if I wanted to update my slide, and I said no. So that's, that's what happens. And yeah, so I work primarily in Drupal, PHP, a lot of Sass and CSS theming, also work in React and doing front-end stuff like that.
All right, let's not forget that a key component of this whole thing, why most of us are here, is Drupal. Now, I know that it may be kind of silly, but I'm going to describe Drupal a little bit because there may be some people that are coming to this the first time and are not entirely familiar with Drupal, heard of it. Drupal is the open source content management system that really has a lot of power. It's very flexible, and it's been our basically our CMF of choice at Civic Actions, for the most part of our skill set. It's strong in security. It's got great performance and scaling. It's got marketing, automation, all sorts of bells and whistles that you can use to help you with that. Personalization is available. And most importantly, I think it's got multilingual opportunities built into it from the ground up. So it makes a really different experience between Drupal 7, Drupal 8, and now moving into Drupal 9, having that available as kind of the baseline. All right, let's select the next slide. And of course, we can't forget the USWDS. The USWDS is a design system for federal government to make it easier to build accessible, mobile-friendly government websites for the American public. Yeah, it's great. It's actually a really good tool. It provides components, design tokens, gives utilities to help you do your work, page templates, does all sorts of great stuff to really help kind of give you a jump start. Accessibility, you name it, and it really helps in prototyping. So it's a great tool, and that's why we're talking about it today. Okay, Brian? Perfect. Brian, why don't you want to talk a little bit about the demo that we've set up?
Sure. So we set up a GitHub for this demo that we're going to show, and you can go and clone it and try to run it yourself. We set this up. We first started doing this presentation a few months ago, so hopefully everything is still running. I probably need to make some updates to Lando and stuff in there. So, and speaking of Lando, we've included a Lando YAML file so that you can spin it up locally if you want, if you like using Lando. And there's also a database included in the repo, so you can do that import command, and kind of that will get you a site that's spun up about to where like the end of this presentation is. There's not much there, but it's a good little chunk of stuff to look at.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. All right, getting started. Let's take a look behind the curtain. So first, we've got to start with the D.O theme. So looking at the theme, you'll see that we have been working with a number of people. It was initially created by Brock Fanning. Currently, our own Civic Actions developer, Iris Ibekwe, and Jay Darnell are the co-maintainers. If you have any patches or if you have any issues when taking a look at it, we would love to hear from you. You know, the Drupal community has been great for helping push projects forward, and it's really important if you do use it to be able to help us by you know, providing input and information for that.
I think I'll pick it up from here. I was supposed to pick it up at the last slide, wasn't I? But thanks for doing that.
That's all right, no worries.
Okay, so the next bit we're going to talk about is setting up a Gulp workflow. And we're going to use USWDS Gulp. It is a Gulp workflow that is maintained by the USWDS team. And this is kind of from their site. The USWDS Gulp repo is made for developers new to Gulp or those who just want a simple setup to get things started quickly. That's us. The repo contains files and instructions for installing Gulp 4.0 into your project, initializing USWDS, and compiling CSS from source files. You can use any sort of Gulp workflow you wish. You don't even have to use Gulp. Anything that compiles Sass you can use. For the sake of this demo, we're going to show with this USWDS Gulp because it works great. It works out of the box. It has all of the stuff kind of considered for USWDS. It's pretty easy to use. It's easy to maintain and modify. If you want to add some extra Gulp things, extra things into your workflow, you can modify it to do that. And it works pretty well inside of a Drupal subtheme. So that's our choice for using that in this presentation. And so setting up the Gulp workflow. To install USWDS, you're going to go to the root of your theme. And this is from the README of the USWDS Gulp project. This is the long install command. And for our sake, since we're running this inside of this Lando sandbox, we're going to add Lando yarn add instead of npm install because we're using yarn instead of npm. But other than that, everything is pretty much the same. So before we get too deep into this, I am going to show you this demo site that we have spun up here. And so here's the demo site. We've copied out the example child theme out of the contributed USWDS theme. We've put that into our custom theme and it's been enabled, but it looks like this. It doesn't look great. And that's because the theme for USWDS is more of an integration. So it doesn't actually come with the USWDS styling or anything like that. That's why we're going to make this Gulp workflow to start compiling it and build some stuff. So this is what it looks like out of the box. It's not very impressive. And so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to update our package.json file. We're going to make a couple little changes here and there. There's one thing to note. As of a couple days ago, I'll click over to this. This is the USWDS project site on Drupal.org. There's been a release candidate 1 release. That was the 22nd of September. That was just a few days ago. Iris released that. This has a bunch of updates that take care of some of the things we're talking about. So there's actually another sample child theme inside the contributed theme that is set up to use USWDS Gulp, and it has a better README, and it's kind of just set up a little bit more. The sample that we're going to show today is just modifying the old sample, or the other sample that allows you to go a different path into using this. So there's a little bit of a jump start. If you want to use this release candidate 1, you can get a sub theme that's a little bit more up to date. So what things look like here, let me expand this so everybody can see it better. Come on. Well, my PHP storm does not want to expand. I'll get it to go big here in a second, but the first thing I want to show you here is kind of in the file browser here in the side. Inside of the contrib USWDS theme, there's this examples directory. Inside of there, there's this my sub theme, and in the release candidate that I was just talking about, there should be another one. I think it's called something like USWDS Gulp sub theme or something like that. So the first step you would do is you would copy this into your themes custom directory. And here, this one that we're going to be playing with is called new theme right here. And so the first step is going to be to make a couple little edits to this package.json file. And all that we need to do here, let me get into presentation mode here. Come on, there we go. Okay, so all that we need to do here is erase some of these scripts that we no longer need. These are scripts that if you just want to run things without Gulp, we'll take that out of there. And let's see if this will let me get back to my browser. There we go. Okay, so I don't need that stuff. These dependencies I don't really need either. I can leave them in there. They're not going to really hurt anything for the sake of this demo. But the other thing we want to do in this example theme is we want to delete this SAS file that we no longer need. This is the old SAS file that kind of tees up starting your own version of this, but we don't need it because we are going to use USWDS Gulp to manage all that stuff. So I'm just going to trash that. And then let's go ahead and install it with that long command, and let's hope that it doesn't take forever to do. Let's see, get my command line utility back up. Nope, come on. There it is. Okay. Presentation mode's hard to navigate, but we're making it. All right, so I'm gonna type in Lando yarn add, and then all of that stuff from the USWDS Gulp's README. And what this will do, it'll install USWDS Gulp, all of its dependencies, and everything that it needs to run. And sometimes the demo guards are nice to us, and this goes pretty quick, and sometimes it decides to churn on. We'll see what it does today.
Yeah, flip a coin, right?
Yeah. My computer's getting old. It's like an old creaky boat. Like it's running a couple of Docker things that I didn't want to kill before this because I didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to get them back up and running. All right, it got mad about something, but I think that is fine. We'll see if that's fine. Okay, so let's keep powering through and see what happens. The next step, and this is in the USWDS Gulp's README, which, where is that? Right here. USWDS Gulp. On their GitHub page, it kind of spells out how to do all of this stuff. And one of the last steps is to copy out the Gulp file that it provides. So that's right here. And what we'll do here is copy that. And so what's going to do is it's going to copy out your starter Gulp file from the node modules USWDS Gulp directory where it installed itself. All right. Oh, you know what? I did not go into our theme directory. Okay, so let's do that one more time. Sorry, everybody. So I did that on purpose so you would see what happens when you don't install things in the right location. All right, well.
It's such a great learning opportunity, Brian. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So now we'll copy that over. There we go. So I've copied that Gulp file out and Gulp file, there we go. Just took a minute to catch up. All right, let's jump back to the slides real quick though, to make sure we're on track. So this is where we're at here. We just installed that stuff. And now we're gonna set up the Gulp workflow. So we have to update this gulp.js file to fit for our Drupal theme here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change a lot of these directories you can see in the screenshot. And what this does is it tells Gulp where to copy your images, JavaScript, and fonts over so that the theme uses them. It puts it into a /assets directory, and you want to make sure you keep with that because the theme has some pre-process and other things that are looking for certain things inside of /assets. And then we're going to keep our Sass and CSS at the theme root. So you can see here, images and fonts and JavaScript are going into assets, but we're going to handle all the Sass at the root. We're going to compile our CSS to the root. And then so the last step here after you set those things is to run Gulp init. So let's do that real quick here. It says empty. Well, there's an empty one in between there. It's kind of like a little break. All right. So first thing we do, we change the Sass path here. And that goes to the root of this project. So we're going to use that .sass. And the images is going to be this. And /img, you want to keep those things exactly like this because in your USWDS settings that we'll cover later, it's looking for things to be in a directory called /img. So there are ways to change that if you need to, but it's easiest just to kind of let it do what it wants to do for the most part. All right, there is JavaScript. And then the last bit here is we want our CSS to go here to the root. All right, so that's all we need to do to initialize USWDS. All of this other stuff is kind of pre-set up to do this stuff, and let's see if it all works. So the last step here, we're going to run Lando, since we're inside of the Lando local here. If you weren't using Lando, you wouldn't have to do Lando before this, but we'll do Lando Gulp init. And it did not like that. Oh no, I'm sorry. Lando yarn Gulp init. So I don't have Gulp as a command that I've set in Lando, so I'm doing everything through yarn. That's why I'm using yarn, so I don't have to have all these different things. I just threw yarn in there, and then it's handling all of the stuff with that. So there we go. Lando yarn Gulp init. If you're doing this outside of Lando, you could just do Gulp init if you had Gulp installed. This one is usually pretty fast to run. So what it's doing is it's copying all the stuff over. It's building some Sass, you can't really see a whole lot of that. Let's do this. It tells you that these are notifications up here that are coming from USWDS. They're not necessarily errors, they're just notifications. If they bother you, you can turn that off in a setting, which I'll show you some settings later. All right, so that worked, and it worked pretty fast, so that's good. Let's go back to our slides here. Okay, so, oops, where are we at? Okay, so what that did is it copied a bunch of stuff over into our project, into our theme root. But we do still need to change a couple more things to get this to start working. So the first step here is to update some of those asset paths that we were just talking about. We need to tell USWDS where our stuff is, pretty much all the stuff that we copied over. So there's a couple of files where we do this, and the images are in the theme general SAS file. The fonts are in the typography SAS settings file. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new settings file to contain this stuff, though. So let's do that. So what that does, when it copies everything over inside of the SAS directory here, we now have all of these USWDS SAS partials, and what these are settings for USWDS. And so what we'll do is, instead of altering, so you can go into here and you can start to make changes, but instead of doing that, we're going to make a new file that has just our settings in it. And just like this, we'll call it USWDS Theme. We'll name it in a similar way, but we'll call it custom settings.scss. So now we have this empty file, and we can go and find the settings we want. So the first one I was talking about was in general. So inside of the general, make this a little bit easier to see, you can see the first setting that it has, and these are set as variables here, is the theme image path, and it's right now looking for one directory up /img, but we know ours are actually in assets/img, so all that we need to do is update that. So what I'm going to do is copy this out, and I'm going to go back into our custom styles. Nope, that's not the right one, this one. And I will just paste that in there and then update the path as well. This will make a little bit more sense when we get into the next section too. So that's the first thing. I'm telling USWDS where my images are. The next thing I need to do is tell it where my typography is. So I'm going to open up the typography settings file. I'm going to go and find the setting that I want, and it's this one, theme font path. I'm just going to copy that out of there. Go back to custom setting here and paste that in there. Okay, so now that we have that, let's look at where we're at on our slides. So we've just done these two things. We've copied them into our own new settings file. And we also have to update the library references in the theme.info file. So that's set up with the library is set up in the parent theme. So we need to override it and tell it, actually the CSS is in this specific location and the JavaScript assets are in our theme. So we're just gonna make these couple of little changes there. And where is it? There we go. So let's open up the theme info file, and we will change this. So this isn't where our compiled CSS is anymore. It is going to be right at CSS/styles.css, because that's the name of the SAS file. That is the master SAS file that comes out of USWDS Gulp. So we're going to match that name there. This can stay the same because we kept our JavaScript in the assets directory. So that's the only change we need to make there. Let's see where we're at in slides now. All right, now we can move on to using USWDS Gulp. So we will, whoa, sorry. So the next thing we need to do is update that styles.sass to compile our new settings, and then we're going to remove the others. We're going to compile the initial style sheet here by running the build sass command, and then I'll show you how to watch for changes, and then we'll talk about next steps of setting some more settings here. So let's do that. So let's open up styles.scss. And this comes, again, like most of these files come straight out of USWDS Gulp. And so this is what it does. It imports all of the settings in this specific order here. It gets the general, typography, spacing, color, utilities, and then the components. Components need to import last. And then it imports USWDS down here. So it grabs all the settings, then it grabs all the SAS for USWDS, takes the settings, and it compiles USWDS based on the settings that we've set. That's kind of the chain of operations that happens. And then anything that we're doing custom after that, so any custom SAS that's not part of USWDS gets imported after USWDS. All of this commented out stuff is giving examples of how to import individual components. So if you weren't using all of USWDS, it is possible just to use little bits and pieces of it. It's pretty modular. We're not going to cover that in this presentation, but that's something to look into if you don't want to import the entire bunch of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this stuff out because I'm not going to import their settings. I'm just going to import the settings that we are overriding. So I'm going to do import USWDS custom setting .scss. All right, so that should be all we need to do. And that should be all we need to do to get USWDS to compile. So let's just give it a shot here. So I'm going to run lando yarn gulp build SAS. That's the command to just build SAS once there. It's doing its thing. Lando's giving us a bunch of warnings as well, saying that's out of date. That's all okay though. These are, again, the notifications that are coming from USWDS. It's kind of just a status of what's going on. All right, it finished. I'm going to go ahead and clear Drush cache now. And let's see what that theme looks like now.
Brian, if you have issues with the font, and maybe someone noticed that you forgot to add assets to the font path.
Did I? Well, let's go take a look at that.
Thank you, Alex and Scott. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. I always mess up something on this every single time I do it. We probably wouldn't have even noticed it. There would have been some 404s in the console. But let's see what happens. We won't compile it again. Let's just see what happens here when I reload the site. Luckily, things like missing fonts fail pretty gracefully on the web. All right, so there we go. We have basic USWDS styling, and let's see if we can open the inspector here. If we see those 404s from the fonts, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Yeah, so it's not finding the fonts, and the reason is because of that. So let's recompile.
I love when you plan these education moments, Brian. They're great.
Yeah, everybody's passing the tests so far. Good job, everybody.
They're actually paying attention. So no one's napping during the code, or at least those guys aren't napping. That's good to know. It's
been a while since I've done any of this, so it's all like, oh wow, I forget how you do that. Good thing we have all these notes. Okay, so that's done. I'm not going to clear cache. I think it'll be fine. All right, it's mad about some other stuff. Well, not really mad, just some warnings, but our 404s are gone. So that shows that that stuff really works. But now we see that there's the USWDS default styling is now in effect, and you can kind of see that it's looking like a thing. And we haven't really done anything yet other than compile a couple of settings. So let's move on to the next portion of this, and that's talking more in depth about colors, fonts, and other settings. So we'll get into some more of these settings and things like that. So first we're going to talk about adjusting colors. And something to note about USWDS before we get too deep into it is that USWDS uses a subset of color families and colors. They're all marked as a grade, and the color grades are designed to help select accessible color pairings for acceptable contrast. So a difference in 40 plus in grades results in a WCAG 2.0 AA large text contrast. 50 plus difference, that means if you're using like blue 10 and red 70, that's a 50 plus difference, that will result in a WCAG 2.0 AA or AAA large text contrast. Oops. Go back. 70 plus will get you into the AAA, and as a note, any grade that's 50 results in 508 AA contrast against white or black. So against 0 or 100, any of the colors at 50 will automatically get you at that 508 AA. So it's kind of like a nice way to, you can pick colors based on knowing these different sorts of grades and things like that. So how do we adjust the colors? We add specific color settings to that custom settings file that we are talking about. And also, I've created this little tool that you can use to help match the colors, because this is what you see in USWDS. You don't really have much of a visual for what this means. So there's this, there's this tool here that is linked to in the slide decks, or you could find it at civicactions.github.io/USWDS color tool. And what it does is it lays out all of the USWDS colors here. So these are the families, red, cool, for example, and then these are the grades within there. And it shows a little swatch of what that color looks like. So you can see here, there's a whole bunch of them. I'm not gonna scroll too fast, I don't wanna make you guys dizzy, but then you can see the grays down here at the bottom. So the way that this works, let's say your design team or a branding guide has a specific hex color that they want to use, but you want to try to stick with these USWDS colors. You can put that color in this little input right here, and it'll show a swatch of it, and then it will find the nearest match in USWDS. So in this case, it's yellow 20V. It shows it right there. And if this color, if you don't like this suggestion, you could also keep clicking around to try to find a match that you like better. I don't think we're going to find a better match than that, but this other box will update with the USWDS color. It'll also tell you what the hex value of that USWDS color is. Another thing you can do with this is if you're trying to visualize things, these are drag droppable. You can kind of move them around. Somewhat useful if you're trying to look at just a certain subset of colors. This tool's not super smart. Like if you hit reload, it forgets everything. It's kind of a quickly built, hacked together thing. Also, it's using colors from this version of USWDS. And as you can see, I don't know if you noticed it, when we're compiling before, USWDS that we have on the site is version 2.8. And I don't think colors have changed in between these two versions, but if there is a color change, I know there has been some since the beginning of the launch of V2. If there is a color change, or if you notice that this isn't quite matching up, you can fork this repo and load it up locally. There's some instructions on how to do that, and you can update it to the latest USWDS, or you could put an issue out on GitHub for this to have it get updated and posted. I should probably do an update now that I think 2.8 is stable. All of that info is right here, so you can find the repo to this inside of here. You can also find some of the resources and some of the things that are used to create the tool. All right, so enough about that. Let's get back into the colors here in the site. So everything's kept in a settings file. So the colors are inside of here. So here you can see all of this. These are all the default colors. So if you don't import your own settings, this is what USWDS spits out by default. This is what you see in all the examples on the USWDS website. It's just kind of the defaults here. All right, let's go to the next slide. Oops, actually, let's change some colors. Let's show how that works. Kind of skipped that part. So I already have another theme set up here that I'm going to do so we don't have to go through the painful experience of watching me set a bunch of color values.
Brian, could you maybe change one just so that people see?
Yeah, I'll change a bunch in this one here. All right, so I'm going to set this other child theme as the default. And while that's doing that, let's take a look at what that child theme looks like. So we'll get out of the new theme, we'll look at this demo one. So I have all of this stuff already done in this folder. So inside of the SAS directory here, we're gonna look at our custom settings here. So this is that same file that I started building, that I built from scratch, that I added the paths in at first, but this one's a little bit more structured. So I've added some commenting to show which settings go to which default file here. So here's my settings from general that I'm changing. I turned off some of the notifications and things so that it's a little bit cleaner when it compiles. I've done a little bit with typography that we'll get into in the next section. But then in colors, you can see I've changed the primary colors. I've changed them from they're like in this gold yellow family, whereas by default, they are in these blues. So in our custom one, we're using golds and oranges and yellows. And for secondary, we're using some cyan colors. I've also set some of the accent cool colors. And that's all that I've changed. And so if we go back to the color file, you can see there's a lot more colors inside of here. There's state palette colors. That means like error colors, warning colors, success, info, disabled. There's some colors for link handling defined inside of here. You can copy any of these things and change them to whatever you want. But for this demo, I've only changed primary, secondary, and some of the accent cool colors. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here, let's go back to the home. So you can see what's being changed are just those colors. We haven't written any custom SAS whatsoever, and so things have changed quite a bit. So if we look back at our old site here, you can see, you know, these blues and things, how they look, and just by changing colors, things start to change pretty dramatically. So that is what a color change looks like. Let's talk about fonts next. So USWDS comes packaged with a standard set of fonts that include Merriweather, Open Sans, Public Sans, Roboto Mono, and Source Sans Pro. You can also add some custom fonts, and to do that, you need to add them to your font assets directory, and then you have to define them in that custom settings file. So there's an example that they've set up for you inside of this USWDS theme typography settings file. And what some of this looks like is this. So there's a few things you have to do. Setting up a new font is a little bit involved, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it's not that big of a deal. So in this example, I've had to set a setting for a typeface token. So I've set up one for Nonito, and the display name of this font is Nonito. I've set the cap height of 364. This is what all the other ones are. It's kind of the default, but you could change that if you have a need to. And then I've changed the theme font type sans. So the sans serif font that the site's using, I've changed that to my new token of Nonito. We'll walk through this a little bit more in depth when I show the file. And then I've set a custom font stack because it doesn't know what font stack to use for this new sans serif font that I've thrown in there. And I've just set that up to like Helvetica to Arial to just generic sans serif. And then to define where the font actually is, I've told it where the directory is. So this is inside the fonts assets directory. I've set up a directory called Nonito. And I'm only setting a few of these font weights of Roman and italic. Like I don't have any italics because I didn't bring in an italic font. So those are all set to false. And then these represent the font weight. So at 300 and 400, we're using semi-bold, or 300 to 600, we're using semi-bold. And then once you get to 700, we're using a different font file called Nuneato Bold. So what that looks like over here is this. Let's scroll back up here. So this is all of the same stuff that I just showed you, but let's take a look inside of typography for a second. And this lays out a bunch of things here. This file took me a while to kind of understand what was going on inside of it. So we're not going to get into all of it because there's a whole lot of settings here. Let's scroll up to the top here. So this first setting, if you don't want users to be able to change the font size, I don't know why you would want to set that to false, but you can. You shouldn't set that to false. It also sets the root font size. And then a couple of other little things. So you can turn on these global paragraph styles, and then it'll start to apply to more than just paragraphs that have certain classes and things on them. There's the path that we already talked about. And then it starts to set up some examples. So this is how to set up a token. And this is the setting up that Nuneato token that I was showing in that other slide. These are just examples. So they kind of started to set some of the stuff up for you so that you know how it works. But out of the box, if you're not including your own font, these are all of the fonts available. So in addition to the ones I named in that slide, there are a few system fonts that are also kind of named inside of here that you can use. And then these are the tokens that are being used to set which font is filling which role. So in USWDS, there's condensed, icon, language-specific fonts, monospace fonts, sans serif, and serif. So if you want to change a font, you will change its role in one of these categories. So in our case, I changed the sans serif font, and so I changed it out of Source Sans Pro. But you can change if you wanted to just change to one of these that's already loaded. You don't have to do anything more than to copy over. Like let's say I wanted, instead of Source Sans Pro, I wanted Public Sans. Oops. All right, I don't know why that doesn't want to paste, but you would just change this to be, what is this? Oh, it's read only for some reason. Okay, let's just say, I don't. All right, well let's just pretend I changed it because I don't know what's going on with PHP Storm at the moment. But you could just change these tokens to one of these named values, and then you're done. But if you want to use a custom font, it kind of talks about some of the stuff here that we were talking about. You can change the font stacks independently. So this is getting into some really like tweaking of the typography type stuff. But if you are bringing in a custom font, you do need to set a custom font stack. And then this shows the example that I was just showing of how to set that custom font. And the other thing I want to show here is some of the role-based font settings. So we now have our settings for sans serif, serif, monospace fonts, and then we have to tell USWDS where those things are used. And by default, it's already set up. And very rarely you would be changing much of this. But it sets up these roles for things like UI, heading, body, code, and alt. And this is where you would set you would kind of intermix these values. You don't actually set the font. Like I wouldn't write Nuneato in here. I would say sans, which I've set to Nuneato. So it's kind of this inherited stack of things that's happening. I think I'm gonna put a pin in the font discussion there because there's a lot more stuff in here that we don't really have a whole lot of time to get into. But if you are curious in fonts, you can kind of dig through this file and read some more about it. I will show you what my new font looked like. So inside of assets here, fonts, this stuff got copied over by USWDS Gulp. And then I just added my own directory here called Nuneato, dropped in the fonts, the physical font file, not physical, but digital font files that I needed to make those fonts work, and then define them out here in the settings. So let's take one last look at that, and then we can say goodbye to fonts forever. unless you guys have questions about
Hey,
it
Brian,
after
I
the.
think we actually ran a little bit long today, so
Yeah, I hated to cut you guys off, but I
Oh,
want to
shoot.
make sure we have time for some questions here. There was a question about using USWDS as instead of using the base USWDS, and can you explain if you're doing that or why not?
Sure. Okay. The reason why we're using USWDS, or the one that's namespace at USWDS, is because, as Dustin mentioned kind of at the top, a couple of our team members maintain that theme, and it's been around longer than USWDS base was, so we kind of just started up using that. USWDS base is accomplishing the same exact thing. You can do all of this same stuff in USWDS base. I've never used it, so I can't speak a lot to it, but I do know that so our theme, or the USWDS namespace theme, is a child theme of Classy, which is a core base theme. And so anything where we're not overwriting stuff, it's just default Classy. So you can expect a lot of Drupal-y stuff to just work out of the box, as far as like contextual editing and things like that, where you can have some issues when you're building a theme straight from scratch, which USWDS base does. I don't know if it does have any of those issues. It might not. But I think our strategy of using Classy is so that we're inheriting things and then changing things instead of trying to like start everything from scratch.
One quick question, Brian, was a question about the security policy. I believe Iris is actually working to get that for the theme in place, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's so this RC1 release that came out a couple days ago is the first steps to that. So we should be pretty close. The problem is we don't have a whole lot of dedicated help to doing this. So it'd be great to if you have a motivation to see that, to get into the issue queue and help us get things cleared up. Really the only steps between getting there is to make the next release and then opt into it, and then we'll be covered by it.
One last quick question, is USWDS Drupal 9 compliant? And then we need to...
There are some Drupal 9 issues that have been resolved recently in the issue queue. So far, the scans that kind of check for that stuff are good. Once we get into the next release, we should be on track. I don't think we have anything deprecated in it, so it should be USWDS 9, or not Drupal 9 compatible.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, if you guys want to hang out in the Slack channels, and there's a Slack channel for this track, site building and using Drupal. If anyone has any other questions, definitely head over there and ask them.
Great, thanks everybody. I'm sorry we ran over, but
no,
we didn't have a whole
good.
lot left.
Yeah, this is great. This is great.
I think really all we had left was a walkthrough, and if you've already got the site built, then you can see those things, and we'll make the deck available for people. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.